Namaskar, my name is Ajay Kumar Dubey. I am a student of International Studies. I am faculty member in School of International Studies, JNU. I would like to thank HRDC, JNU and Professor Sanjay Bhardwaj to give me this opportunity to come and talk to you about a topic which is not very old in political science and international relations. The topic that I am going to take up for discussion and for presentation is Indian diaspora in foreign policy of India. I'm sure all of you must have heard about diaspora, but diaspora as a factor, as a part of India's foreign policy is not more than 3 decades old. And why it just entered 3 decades earlier, why diaspora has become one of the important determinant of India's foreign policy, what importance it has today, is something that we are going to discuss. But we are also going to elucidate, account for, and trace the evolution of this new diaspora policy of India. But before I go to that, just a few concepts so that those of you who are not a student of diaspora studies become familiar with this. Diaspora, as all of you know, refers to the category of people who have migrated internationally from one country to another country and have settled down there for a longer period of time. Some of them have acquired citizenship over there, quit their citizenship of India. Some of them are still holding on to Indian citizenship despite the fact that they are there for over more than 20 to 30 years. And these people are called diaspora of India. In understanding diaspora of India and diaspora foreign policy, there are a few other concepts that you should remember. One is the old diaspora and new diaspora. Old diaspora refers to those category of Indian people who migrated during colonial time before Indian independence, and they went largely during colonial period as indentured worker. Before that they went as traders all over the world, and even before that, during ancient time, they had gone as preachers and propagator of knowledge. So these people who went during colonial period, before that as traders and merchants and moneylenders during medieval times, and also those who went during ancient time as preacher of Buddhism and other faith of India, they are old diaspora people. The new diaspora refers to the people who went out of India to migrate or to work after independence of India, and we refer to them also in 2 categories. One, those who have gone and settled there and acquired the local citizenship, they are called people of Indian origin, PIO. And those people who went after independence, still hold on to Indian passport, are called NRI, non-resident Indians. So therefore, in the new diaspora, you have PIO and NRI, and the difference is the NRI are Indian citizens and PIOs are largely referred to those who become local citizens. In many developed countries, the NRI of today are PIO of tomorrow. In the same family, one generation is in NRI, the other generation is PIO. So that's the overlap you must understand. The next category and concept that we should understand in terms of understanding India's foreign policy towards its diaspora is the concept of lost diaspora, concept of dormant diaspora. When people of Indian origin went during ancient time or medieval times or even colonial times and got assimilated in local population, they are called lost diaspora or dormant diaspora because they are not in a position to assert their Indian identity. And you have quite a good number of them who went to Africa during the First World War, those who went to Francophone colony, even during colonial period, because of the assimilation policy of France, they got completely assimilated. And it's difficult for them to resurrect their Indian identity. Similarly, in Myanmar, where we have one of the largest Indian diaspora, they got intermarried with the locals, and it's very difficult at this stage to find out their real Indian diaspora category between those who are hybrid and those who are of Indian descent. So these are some of the things that decides India's foreign policy towards its diaspora. Therefore, I thought I'll take it up in the beginning. That Indian diaspora policy that we are discussing today, we are confining to the one which started after independence of India, though diaspora in India's external understanding is much older than that. In fact, it's important for us to refer some time back before independence because it has serious consequences for Indian diaspora policy after independence. In 1930, when Jawaharlal Nehru became in charge of Indian National Congress Foreign Policy Cell, he wrote papers on Indian diaspora, and he wrote certain paragraphs that were adopted in every Indian National Congress resolution year after year, whenever the annual convention of Indian National Congress used to take place. And he was also in charge of the Indian National Congress Foreign Policy Cell, where he said that people of Indian origin who have gone out of the country and adopted the local citizenship or settled down over there, they are not of any concern to India. They are local citizens over there. For us, they are like foreigners, and our policy towards them should be exactly like the policy that we have for foreign citizens or foreign nationals. And therefore, he followed a policy that is called a policy of active dissociation with Indian diaspora. And when he became Prime Minister in 1947, after India's independence, he followed that policy to the hilt of actively dissociating with Indian diaspora worldwide, which has a very serious consequences for diaspora worldwide, which felt let down, which felt betrayed, which felt that though they had gone under very difficult circumstances, they were lewd, they were misinformed, they were at times taken under deceptions that you will earn so much money, so much gold. All those false promises were made. And they were Indian citizens, and they were part of Indian independence thinking. They contributed in some way globally. And India, after getting independence, is completely disowning them. And most of the places they were in minority situation, and when the mother country disowns them in that situation, they felt completely left out and unsupported. And that's the grudge that they nurture till today. In the old Indian diaspora, if you go and talk to them that India is interested, they will keep telling you that India is interested because we have become rich, we are affluent in our society, we have powerful lobbies, and India wants to use us for its own purposes now and under Nehru, and they don't distinguish between Nehru and others. Under Congress government, we were completely disowned. So that's the policy of India of active dissociation before independence and after independence under Nehru, because Nehru believed that they are foreign citizens and we should not connect with them. But in 1962, Indo-Chinese War had serious consequences on Nehru rethinking. When he was sad, when he felt betrayed, when he had no one supporting and coming and consoling him. Then, for the first time, Nehru said, the diaspora, which by 1962 worldwide has become affluent, has surfaced globally in some sense, he said, people of Indian origin who had gone out of the country have dual loyalty. One with the country where they are settled, and one with mother country where from they went. And this, he said, after suffering a setback in Indo-Chinese war, where he was not finding much support for many of his friends whom he had promoted, like Afro-Asian resurgence he had promoted, and African countries, barring four, were all with China, not with India. And therefore, when he made this appeal, and diaspora had always complained and had resented Indian policy of active dissociation, came round. And it is a matter of record that in many countries, the Indian diaspora queued up in the Indian embassy to give money, to give gold, to provide whatever help they had to give to Indian embassy to support India against Chinese aggression. And that's where the India realized that diaspora is so much attached and concerned with India, which India had neglected under Nehru, under its Nehruvian policy. As a result, there was softening of India. Mrs. Gandhi didn't change the basic tenets of diaspora policy of India, of dissociation, but she started using it in a softer way. The word active dissociation has to be now replaced by more silent recognitions. And therefore, she started calling in her foreign visit as ambassadors, unofficial ambassadors of India. She also started visiting Indian community whenever she used to go out, though she didn't change anything in foreign policy to link with Indian diaspora overtly, which Nehru had followed so far. It's only in 1990, with the end of Cold War, with the advent of globalization, and with the shifting policy of many countries from a state-controlled economy to market economy to globalization, that diaspora worldwide, including in India, started surfacing in foreign policy of different countries, including in India. And diaspora became a major driver of globalization worldwide. It emerged as a mega trend of globalizations, and therefore its impact was felt in India also. In 1990, when India was transiting from a state control to market control economy, it didn't have foreign exchange to pay for the 3 weeks of import bill. For $2 billion, which it needed, it didn't have in its Reserve Bank of India account or in any of its bank account in terms of dollar, just $2 billion. And for that, it mortgaged two plane loads of gold from Reserve Bank of India to Bank of England to get a bank guarantee, not the money, just a chit of guarantee that if India is unable to pay this $2 billion import bill, Bank of England will pay. And those two plane loads of gold lifted from Reserve Bank of India, parked into England, even today, completely shocked the country. It shocked the conscience. It forced country to relook on what are its assets, strength and weakness outside, and can India relook towards diaspora, which by 1919 globally has become very rich, very affluent, and in North America and Europe, it was calling the shot, and it was one of the most affluent sections of local society. And therefore, when India tried to mobilize money to park their fund into State Bank of India account so that India does not become a bankrupt state, it does not default in its foreign exchange payment, it approached the diaspora. And naturally, diaspora response was what was expected. They said, hello, where is India? Who are we? How are we related to you? Do you know who we are? Because that's the policy India had followed in the past by its active dissociation policy. And when Congress tried to woo them, it didn't cut much ice. But what is important that when a state followed a policy of active dissociation under Nehru, there were organizations like RSS and Jan Sangh who had followed a policy of connecting with diaspora despite a policy of active dissociation by Indian state. They had reached out to the people of Indian origin for their cultural, religious, social, emotional need, and they were in contact through correspondence by sending the Pracharak by inviting them, by organizing their meetings. And the communication was there. So when Congress government from 1990 till mid-90s could not cut ice in terms of wooing the diaspora, the Congress used several emissaries to send them to talk to them when they were not moving forward to come to rescue of Indian economic crisis. When BJP government under Atal Bihari Vajpayee came, the old RSS Connect and BJP policy to link with diaspora immediately changed the chemistry. And that's the time from when you have a U-turn in Indian diaspora policy. Vajpayee established a Singhvi committee with 5 members which reached out to diaspora in large number of countries where diaspora were in good numbers, tried to understand what they expect from India, what are their grievances, what they want from India now, and what they can do for India when India is trying to shift from a state control to market control economy and to grow faster than what it had been doing in the past under BJP government. And the diaspora responded. There were dialogues. Diaspora said, we want certain things you have to give, and we will give you what you want. India launched 2 India Resurgent bonds, one after another, 4 billion, first 2 billion, again 2 billion, of 4 billion US dollar, where the diaspora was supposed to park its money by buying these papers into State Bank of India. And these 4 billions of bonds were oversubscribed by more than 4 billions. And so the total 8 billion was parked by Indian diaspora in the State Bank of India branches as a part of the India Resurgent Bond, which freed India completely for any foreign exchange crisis, where we were just looking for $2 billion not to be declared as a bankrupt Indian state under transitions. So diaspora responded, and in terms India also responded under high power committee that Vajpayee ji had set. It gave certain instruments, certain policies, certain facilities which made the diaspora respond more aggressively later on. And some of these policies were like the policy of Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, where diaspora used to meet every year from 7th to 9th of January with Prime Minister, with President, with all the cabinet ministers, with the chief ministers, and 3 days get together of diaspora achievers and top Indian policymakers, government officials were organized. India established Bharat Samman, where it started honoring instead of disowning, and proactively honoring and giving Bharat Samman to many diaspora achievers. It also established what is called a PIO card, where Indian diaspora all over the world who are up to the 7th generation, they were given a card which gave them 15 years of visa-free access. They had no political right to vote and buy agriculture property, but all other rights of Indian citizens were extended to them except these 2. They were supposed to be treated like Indian citizens for air travel within India. They were supposed to pay the same tuition fee as an Indian student in India, and large number of seats were reserved, up to 15% at one point of time, as a supernumeric seats in public institutions which were to be given to Indian diaspora people. And similarly, a large number of other programs were launched. Some of them are called No India program for young children to come, and No India with participation of youth. There were Bima Yojana for Indian citizens in the Gulf who are low-skilled workers, how to make them secure when they come back. There were also treaties done with different countries where diaspora were protected by the treaties, and these treaties provided them also the transfer of pensions and proactively reach out of India to diaspora in terms of any abuse being done to them. So both for rich Indian diaspora outside in North America and Europe, and for a very poor but very large number of around 6 million people of Indian origin in the Gulf region who are semi-skilled, low-skilled or unskilled worker, working in this area. Several schemes were launched, and diaspora then started responding positively. But soon India, with help of this money, bypassed structural adjustment program, conditionality launched by World Bank and IMF. It went ahead with the reform, with the economic liberalization, but its own pace and by sequencing in its own wage. And therefore, it was soon a success. By end of 1990s, India had more than 250 billion US dollar parked in reserve as foreign exchange, and there was no need for diaspora money. Then India launched programs and policies where it wanted to diaspora to involve in terms of investment, in terms of FDI, in terms of several other investment. But diaspora didn't contribute much in that section, because the Chinese diaspora in a decade ago, when was approached by China, had contributed more than 64% of total FDI which came to China. In case of India, diasporic investment never exceeded 9 to 11%. So it was not very high, not because diaspora was not interested, because any other player who wanted to invest in India, they didn't need to hold hand of Indian diaspora, which was the case for China. Any other investor to invest in China, they must have a Chinese overseas diaspora back home, and along with them they went to China, because China was not accessible, not understandable, and everything was Chinese to all the outsiders from China. So we could not get such a high percentage of investment. And therefore India then appealed for philanthropic engagement with diaspora, responded, but not much, because the Indian government policy was wrong. It wanted diaspora to pay all the money for philanthropy in the fund that they had established, in the organization they had established, and diaspora didn't trust the bureaucracy. It didn't trust the people who are going to use that. It thought there will be a lot of corruption. It also didn't give name, because no name would be attached. So directly they contributed to their village, to their tehsil, to a district, established school, established hospital, built road, small roads, and they contributed directly. And therefore diaspora policy of India changed its focus from inviting deposits to investment to philanthropy, and then soon it realized that since the philanthropic is working directly, not by policy, then it started utilizing diasporic presence worldwide as a soft presence in order to have some soft power in all those countries where they are located. As a result, diaspora became a catalyst in promoting bilateral relations of India with the country where they are located, as an important segment of population where the local government was using Indian diaspora to promote its connect with India and use that as a catalyst. And therefore, Indian diaspora policy moved from this money-centric approach to diplomatic, strategic approach, and that is where Indian diaspora policy is heading. Currently, under pandemic COVID situation, India recalibrated its diaspora policy, meeting the challenge of COVID. It first sent its team, its doctor, its medical kits, its telemedicine approach in many countries like in Africa and Southeast Asia, where it tried to reach out to the countries where Indian diaspora is located in large number by providing all these paracetamols, medical kits to handle the pandemic situation, to give other medicines like chloroquine to these countries at priority basis. And now when the vaccine has been prepared, the diaspora countries are getting it at priority level. And diaspora does not feel that India is dissociating, is not prioritizing. And under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Indian diaspora is not just associated but trumpeted. Wherever Prime Minister Modi goes, the Indian diaspora program is the prime attractions of the media, and it is communicated in no uncertain term. The diaspora is of concern for India. and diaspora responds to that. And that is where the Indian diaspora policy is engaged to mobilize diaspora, to utilize it as strategic and diplomatic assets, and to work in a situation where there is a win-win situation for both of them. So when we look at this Indian diaspora policy in the current phase, where the diaspora is actively engaged with India, where under Prime Minister Modi, diaspora is one of the prime determinant of India's foreign policy, where under Modi, diaspora has come to demonstrate worldwide, overtly and openly, that it stands for India within that country and on cause that India has to deal with, whether it is the attacks by some expansionist neighborhood, whether the attack by cross-border terrorist groups, or whether any other such challenges that India is meeting, the diaspora is standing with India. But is that something very peculiar to India? As a student of political science, international relations, we need to examine it in a larger context. And the context is the worldwide, under globalization, diaspora, not just of India, has become engaged, though it's a different case that worldwide, the Indian diaspora engagement, the U-turn, the active engagement with diaspora after a proactive dissociation is seen as the most successful diaspora engagement policy. But India is not alone in engaging its diaspora. Worldwide, different countries, as I was mentioning earlier, China has engaged its diaspora, where it brought in 64% of FDI to China through them at certain point of time. Poland has engaged its diaspora. Italy has set up a third chamber for its own diaspora. Like we have two chambers of parliament, Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. In Italy, one chamber of parliament is exclusively for its diaspora. And similarly, many countries are now trying to reach out to diaspora because borders have become much more porous. The communication between the mother country and country of diaspora location has become much more easier and cheaper through internet, through civil aviation, through television access. And therefore, the connect between diaspora and mother countries are becoming much more stronger. Because of all these reasons, you find the diaspora is also demanding from their mother country, including from India, that they need greater connect and greater say in the domestic situation of their mother country. And many times it creates problem, many times it serves as an asset, many times it serves as a liability. In terms of their demand, they want more representation of India in the Indian political system. They want voting right, which Election Commission of India has agreed that they can vote. As those who have Indian passport, they can vote. And there would be arrangement of electronic voting. And Indian Election Commission has communicated to Government of India just a few months back that it is ready to implement electronic voting for diaspora who are present in different countries and who hold Indian passport. The diaspora is also demanding some ministerial positions and a greater say in governance. But as I said, there are two segments of Indian diaspora. One is the old diaspora, which went before independence. They are not interested in such demands. But the NRI diaspora and diaspora that are located in developed countries, they are demanding greater say in governance of India and in governance of other countries worldwide. As you know, 61 countries now get multiple citizenship. India does not give multiple citizenship. And therefore, the citizenship, which was the sole criteria of governance, of loyalty of any person within a state, is itself being eroded. You with multiple citizenship, multiple passport, your loyalty is largely going to be cultural, civilizational, and on the basis that what a stake that you have in that country is being served by that country. And Indian connect with diaspora is largely civilizational, cultural, irrespective of religion, irrespective of language, irrespective of the region. And it is in this area that Indian diaspora is trying to mobilize Indian diaspora to connect with India. Similarly, the other countries that we are trying to mobilize, they have also faced challenges. Country like Ethiopia has a challenge where because of diaspora intervention, it was divided into two. We had faced similar problem in Khalistan, also issues of Elam in Tamil Nadu, and some insurgent movement in Northeast and Jammu and Kashmir. So Indian diaspora, in terms of engaging in India, in terms of engaging through foreign policy, is a double-edged weapon. And it depends how we are going to utilize this. That's the main challenge for India. We see the farmers' movement even today, and we know there are separatist elements outside in diaspora which are supporting some of the demands which are already being met by Indian government, but they are not willing to compromise because the disruptive forces can also come through diaspora. So in Indian foreign policy, diaspora has to be seen in this larger context of assets and liability. Thank you.